So we've been talking about the development of insight, and I was discussing how difficult it is for us to do that. I mean, it's not a simple matter. And what we need to do is we need kind of methods. We need to apply ourselves. It's not something that's going to come spontaneously. For example, if you just do a particular technique a few times, it's not going to happen. And the way that the three different vehicles or schools of Buddhism handle this is different. Again, as I said, the focus, what their insight is, differs depending on the view of that particular vehicle or religion. I mean, all spiritual traditions have their own view, and the Hindu one is very different from the Buddhist view. But within Buddhism, at least, or within these three vehicles, then there are some similarities. As I said yesterday, then in the Theravāda tradition, or the foundational vehicle, then they recognize the three signs of existence. These are three aspects or characteristics of phenomena that are self-evident, that are explored through their meditation. So those three are impermanence, no self, and suffering. So how does that differ from the insight that a Zen practitioner gives rise to? Well, in the Zen tradition, it's what we call the second turning of the wheel of Dharma. I don't know if you're familiar with this term, but in the Zen tradition, they primarily recognize emptiness and what is called the Buddha nature. So, in the morning, you come and you show up and you sit down. And they say, what am I supposed to do? You're supposed to sit. And people are a bit like, well, what are the instructions? And the Zen master says, just sit. And they'll do that for year after year. So, for example, if you don't show up in the morning, right, that Zen master isn't going to think very highly of you. He will see you month after month, year after year, and if he sees somebody is really diligent with their practice, is always there, is always meditating, doesn't make excuses, and then they will develop a kind of respect for that practitioner. And what they say, what you hear them say is, after sitting like that in Zazen for 12 years, then the master will think, this student has got some potential. And they might give them a koan. For example, what is meditating? It's a question. There's these kind of unsolvable riddles. For example, does a dog have Buddha nature? And in the West, we just read them in a book and we think, okay, I've got a koan. I can work with that. It's not like that. Through their dedication to their practice and service to their teacher, then they got the opportunity to rely on their master. And they would go in the morning and they would sit down. And the master would say, how did your meditation go? And the student will say, well, I was trying to do my Zazen, but I was thinking too much. And the teacher will say something like, did I tell you you're not allowed to think? What did I tell you? I told you just to sit. And then the student will go away. And through this interaction with teacher and student, then it is possible for that student to have like an epiphany, a leap-through moment, where they can have what is called sudden realization. It will be a brief moment in meditation where they will go, oh, that was something significant. So what you can see here is that both of these traditions, the Theravāda and the Zen tradition, require a lot of stability and a lot of dedication and a lot of effort. I mean, look at the Shaolin monks. They spend most of the time doing kung fu, but they train themselves with intense discipline. There's a reason for it, because you need to be able to apply yourself persistently if you want to gain insight. I assume some of you are interested in this, as the title of the retreat was about gaining insight, right? Now, the difference between that and what we call the Vajrayāna, or the Tibetan Buddhism, is that we have something called mind instructions. Now, there's some advantage that the Tibetans have over the Zen practitioners, and it's got nothing to do with their own qualities or abilities or their own learning. It just has to do with history and geography. The Korean monks didn't have like an infrastructure for relying on a realized master. When they had questions and they wanted to rely on a master, they would often have to travel for 2 or 3 months into China to find a Zen master. It's important, this, right? Because often in meditation, what happens is we have an experience like, oh, I had this wonderful, blissful experience. That must be emptiness. The teacher, if that realization or that what you think is realization is mistaken, will be able to undermine it very easily, right? Will be able to sort of cut the root of your fake meditation, and then you have to start again. And in Tibet, very isolated country, then they had these monasteries with thousands and thousands of practitioners. And there are also many, many learned meditation masters. So in general there, what you do is you go into retreat with a master, and you can spend years, and often it says in the text, it's like 12 years, 20 years. And that means like every day you can refer your experience from your practice to your teacher. And through that process, at some point, there's the opportunity for recognition of the true nature of phenomena. Still not easy, but it's better if you have someone to give you guidance. And the process is something called mind instruction. People have heard about mind instruction, and so they get the kind of idea that it's a series of techniques, but it's not. It could be anything. It could be anything. If we look at the story of Tilopa and Naropa, for example, that doesn't sound like Dharma. It doesn't sound like any kind of spiritual teaching. It just sounds like abuse, right? The problem is we hang on to our misconception of the world, and we see it to be so true. We have got all these assumptions about the way the world is, and then we build up this kind of database or lexicon in our mind of explanations of how things are, and we refer back to them. So when the teacher asks a question, rather than looking to the source, what we do is we look to our preconceptions. And part of the process is that we have to dismantle those preconceptions, those mistakes, before there's the opportunity or the chance to recognize the way things are. Insight, primordial wisdom, is said to be a non-composite phenomena. It's a phenomena that is causeless. It's spontaneously arising. It's the natural state of how things are right now, in the here and now. It doesn't need to be uncovered. It doesn't need to be discovered. And you can't do anything to develop it. The problem is we don't see that. And that's because we're wrapped up in all of the garbage in our head that we see to be true. For example, you can say, oh yeah, everything's impermanent, but the way we act is not as if things were impermanent. Our habit is to follow our misconception and our delusion. And so part of the process of coming to develop insight is first being able to rest in the present moment through our meditation, to remain mindful. The way it's taught in the Tibetan canon, it's as if there's something that needs to be recognized, like the teacher will ask, where is mind? Something like that, or, what is the true nature of phenomena? It's as if I look in my meditation, then at some point this thing will pop up, and I go, oh, that must be it. Right. There was a wonderful story, actually. Taisita Rinpoche, I took vows from Taisita Rinpoche. He's a really good Mahamudra teacher, and he's got many Western students. And there's a friend of mine who I think he did 3 retreats. He spent about 12 years in retreat. And he used to be the head of a center in Brussels. And he meditated a lot, right? He designed his whole life so he could spend almost all his time meditating and then a little bit of time doing some work so he could feed himself. And he's done this for years, since the late 60s, I think. And so he was meditating, and then he had this feeling like, this experience arose, and he thought, I wonder if that's it. I wonder if that's the true nature. And so he went to Taisita Rinpoche to get confirmation. And he said, Rinpoche, I've been meditating and I've had this experience, and I need to know, is this the Mahamudra? And then he tried to start explaining it to Taisita Rinpoche. He said, well, it's kind of like this. And Rinpoche said, yeah, don't explain it, just meditate, let me see. And so he thought, wow, it's amazing. I'll meditate. And then he started meditating, and he went, that's it. And Taisita Rinpoche said, that's nothing, don't worry about it, just keep meditating. But there's a point behind that. It's because if we identify experience as being something separate and unique to ordinary, everyday experiences, then we are mistaken. Because it is taught to be nothing other than the present moment of awareness. The only thing that is missing is this clinging. Clinging is a process, okay? Clinging is a continuum. We conceptualize our being as a continuum, but it isn't that. It's something that exists here and now. clinging is a process. It's a continuum in the same way. In the Egyptian symbology, this is also in the Celtic traditions, they have this Ouroboros. It's a snake eating its tail. You've probably seen it. They have jewelry where there's a snake eating its own tail. This is kind of symbolizes what we're talking about here, this process of clinging. It's misappropriating different or disparate events and applying them on top of actual experience, or relating them to actual experience. So whenever we objectivize something, then we are stuck in dualistic concepts, right? The idea of subject and object. And that in itself is a conceptual fallacy. So what we do is we train in concentration. Of these three trainings, we train in concentration. Because in order to be able to make this leap through, it's absolutely certain that you need stability in your practice. There's no other way. But as I said before, then that stability itself will not necessarily bring insight. Insight, the cause of insight, is study. But study isn't just looking at words. For example, looking at words on a page. It's not just about memorizing things. It's not just about listening to somebody talk. You can also study experiences. And this is what we do when we're in meditation, right? When you're sitting in meditation and you're going through a process where you're trying to keep your mind focused, other thoughts come in. As long as you're applying mindfulness, what you're doing is you're learning. You're learning from the cosmos. You're learning from your own experiences. There's something there that is, we'll say conceptually, is trying to make itself apparent to you. We don't notice it because we're too wrapped up in our narrative. And we need to dismantle this narrative. And all of the traditions, all of the spiritual traditions, include some amount of work in dismantling these narratives. Whether that be keeping silence, not eating in the evening, having particular conduct, abandoning worldly possessions. All these things that many of us see to be lower forms of practice have a purpose. That purpose is to stop the arisal of the negative emotions.